Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be taking a look at Dopamine Nation, Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence. It's by Dr. Anna Lembke.
Yes. So this book really digs into pleasure and pain, and how those two things really relate to each other, especially in a world that is kind of obsessed with dopamine.
Yeah, for sure. And what I thought was really interesting about this book is that Dr. Lembke uses both like the science behind these concepts as well as personal stories of addiction and recovery, to illustrate her points.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating that she takes this approach of learning about balance, from people who are really struggling with it.
Right. Yeah, that's such a unique perspective. It's like, studying a virus under a microscope to understand how it spreads.
Yeah, and one of the most extreme cases that she talks about in the book is the story of Jacob, this patient who, as a teenager, built a masturbation machine.
Oh, wow, a masturbation machine. I mean, that really speaks to just how strong that drive for pleasure is and, how our ingenuity can get misdirected sometimes.
Absolutely, and it makes you think about, all the ways that our modern world is like a giant dopamine buffet, especially with smartphones.
Well, and Dr. Lembke actually refers to smartphones as modern-day hypodermic needles, constantly delivering these hits of digital dopamine.
Yeah, and she also talks about her own personal experience with getting hooked on romance novels.
Oh, interesting.
So it just goes to show that even something that seems harmless, can become problematic if it starts to really dominate our lives.
Yeah, totally. I mean, have you ever noticed how easy it is to get sucked into something like social media or binge watching it? Wow. It's like, anything can become addictive if you do too much of it, whether it's drugs or video games or romance novels.
Yeah, for sure. And it all comes down to understanding how our brains respond to pleasure and pain, and how to find that balance in a world that's, constantly pushing us towards excess. So to explain this, Dr. Lembke uses this metaphor of a pleasure-pain balance. So when we experience something pleasurable, our brains release dopamine.
Right, and dopamine is often called the feel-good chemical.
Yeah.
But it's actually much more than that.
Yeah, exactly. It's also involved in motivation and reward and habit formation, so it creates this sense of pleasure. And then that motivates us to seek out those rewarding experiences again and again. But the thing is, the brain, it also remembers those rewards and their associated cues.
So even after that initial pleasure kind of fades, our brains still crave it.
Yeah.
Sometimes even years later.
Exactly. And that's why people recovering from addiction can be so vulnerable to relapse, even after long periods of abstinence. Certain places or songs or even smells can trigger those memories and cravings. Like how the smell of baking cookies can instantly transport you back to your childhood.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Those sensory cues are so powerful. They highlight just how deep our experiences are intertwined with our brain's reward system. And this actually reminds me of another patient that Dr. Lembke discusses in the book. His name is David. And he started using Adderall in college to help him focus.
Right. Adderall is a medication that's often prescribed for ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And it's a stimulant. It can improve focus and concentration.
And at first it seemed like it was really helping him with his studies. But eventually he needed more and more of the drug to get that same effect.
Yeah, that's a classic example of tolerance. His body adapted to the drug, and he needed higher doses to feel the same impact.
So it's like he was trying to medicate away his discomfort.
Yeah.
Instead of dealing with the actual root causes of his struggles. Do you think that's a common trend, like in our society?
Well, Dr. Lembke argues that we live in a culture that encourages us to avoid pain and discomfort, often through medication or quick fixes. But the thing is that avoidance can actually backfire and make us more sensitive to pain in the long run.
Okay, so this is starting to sound a little bit bleak. Is there any hope, for finding balance in a world that seems so obsessed with instant gratification and pleasure?
Oh, absolutely. There is hope. Dr. Lembke introduces this idea of dopamine fasting as a way to kind of reset our brains and regain our sensitivity to natural pleasures. So it involves consciously choosing to limit our exposure to these high dopamine activities for a certain period of time.
Oh, that's really interesting. So it's like giving your brain a break from all the stimulating stuff. It probably isn't as simple as just putting your phone away for a few hours, though, right?
Right. It's not quite that simple. Dr. Lembke provides this framework for dopamine fasting, and she calls it dopamine.
Okay, I love that. So each letter stands for a different step in the process.
Exactly. So the D stands for determining your objectives. What do you want to achieve with this dopamine fast?
Okay, so it's kind of like setting a goal before starting a new workout routine.
Exactly, yeah. And then the P stands for problems, identifying the specific issues that are caused by your high dopamine activities. Because acknowledging the negative consequences of your habits can help you understand why you're doing the fast and stay motivated.
Okay, so we have objectives and problems. What comes after that?
The A stands for abstinence, which is the actual period of abstaining from your chosen dopamine triggers. So Dr. Lemke recommends starting with a short duration, like maybe a day or even just a few hours, and then gradually increasing it from there.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like, training for a marathon. You wouldn't jump into running 26 miles without any preparation.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't want to overwhelm yourself. And then the M stands for mindfulness.
So paying attention to your thoughts and feelings during the fast.
Yeah. The idea is to just observe those feelings without judgment and knowing that they will pass.
Okay, we're almost through the framework. What does the I stand for?
The I stands for insights. So this step involves reflecting on the experience, and extracting valuable lessons from it. So asking yourself questions like, what did you learn about yourself during the fast? What were some of your triggers? How did you cope with the discomfort?
Okay, so it's all about introspection and self-discovery. Yeah. And the N, the final step.
The N is for next steps. What will you do differently after the fast? The goal is to use dopamine fasting as a tool for building healthier habits in the long run.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, this framework provides like a really structured approach to dopamine fasting, which makes it seem a lot less daunting. But resisting temptation in a world that just constantly bombards us with dopamine hits, it can be really tough.
You're absolutely right. And that's where this idea of self-binding comes in. So this is using strategies to kind of limit your access to those tempting rewards.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of like Odysseus, having his crew tie him to the mast of the ship to resist the siren's call.
Yeah.
That's such a powerful metaphor for, recognizing your weaknesses and taking steps to overcome them.
Exactly. Yeah, Dr. Lemke emphasizes self-binding as this proactive way to create obstacles that make it harder to give in to those urges. So this could involve practical steps like using website blockers to avoid time-wasting sites, or maybe asking a friend to hold you accountable.
Okay, so we have dopamine fasting and self-binding as strategies for regaining balance. Are there other ways to press on the pain side of the balance, as Dr. Lemke puts it?
Yeah, there are. She discusses activities like cold water immersion exercise and intermittent fasting as ways to create a hormetic response.
A hormetic response. What exactly is that?
So it involves exposing yourself to a short-term stressor. That then triggers this beneficial adaptive response in the body. Think of it like building muscle by lifting weights. You're applying stress to your muscles to make them stronger.
So pushing yourself outside your comfort zone can actually lead to greater strength and resilience.
Exactly. Yeah, cold showers, while initially unpleasant, can boost your mood and improve circulation. It's about shifting our mindset from avoiding pain to understanding it as like an essential part of life.
This reminds me of that saying, no pain, no gain. But isn't there a risk of taking that too far? Could seeking out pain also become an addiction?
That's a great question. And Dr. Lemke does acknowledge that fine line between using pain for growth and becoming dependent on it. Think about like extreme athletes or workaholics who push themselves to the point of burnout. Moderation and self-awareness are really key.
Dr. Lemke also highlights the importance of radical honesty as a tool for recovery and balance. What does she mean by that?
So it's about being truthful, even when it's difficult, especially when it comes to facing our own shortcomings and mistakes. She argues that honesty fosters self-awareness, strengthens relationships, and helps us build a more authentic narrative of our lives.
So it's like being genuine and owning our imperfections instead of trying to present this perfect image to the world.
Exactly. Yeah. It's about being honest with ourselves about our motivations, our desires, our struggles. This actually resonates with the concept of a moral inventory in 12-step programs like Alcoholics Anonymous.
So radical honesty encourages introspection and accountability. How does this help us find balance in our lives?
Well, first, it promotes awareness. By being honest about our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors, we gain a clearer understanding of, what's driving us and what's holding us back. It's like shining a light on those dark corners of our minds that we often try to avoid.
That makes sense.
And second, honesty strengthens relationships. That openness and vulnerability with others, it creates a deeper sense of connection and trust. And it's hard to build genuine intimacy when you're constantly hiding parts of yourself.
That's true. What's a third way that radical honesty helps?
The third way is that it helps us build a more truthful autobiography. By acknowledging our past mistakes and owning our part in them, we can create a more coherent and empowering narrative of our lives. It's about accepting who we are, flaws and all, and using that self-knowledge to make better choices in the future.
This brings us to another concept that Dr. Lemke discusses, pro-social shame. Isn't all shame bad?
So Dr. Lembke makes this distinction between destructive shame, which leads to isolation and perpetuates negative behaviors, and pro-social shame, which can actually be a catalyst for positive change.
I'm curious to learn more about pro-social shame. How can shame be a positive force?
So pro-social shame arises when we disclose a transgression or a personal struggle, and we're met with empathy and understanding instead of judgment. And this type of response, it helps us process our feelings of shame in a healthy way and then take steps toward, making amends and changing our behavior.
So it's about fostering an environment of support and understanding, where people feel comfortable being vulnerable.
Exactly. Yeah. And Dr. Lembke uses the example of Alcoholics Anonymous, where members share their stories of addiction and recovery without judgment. And that sense of community and shared experience is incredibly powerful in helping people overcome shame and find a path to sobriety.
It's encouraging to hear that shame can actually be a tool for growth and connection, rather than just a source of pain and isolation.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really highlights the importance of cultivating empathy and understanding in our interactions with others.
This conversation has been so insightful. I feel like I've gained a much deeper understanding of how my brain works and how to manage those pleasure-pain impulses in a healthier way.
It is fascinating, isn't it? It can be a bit scary to realize how easily our brains can be hijacked by dopamine-driven desires.
It is, but it's also empowering to know that we have the power to choose how we respond to those impulses, to find a path to balance and to create a more fulfilling life.
Well said. And that leads us to the question Dr. Lembke leaves us with. In a world, that's almost designed to maximize dopamine and keep us hooked on that next hit of pleasure, what are you willing to sacrifice to regain balance and live a more meaningful life?
That's a really powerful question. It really makes you think,
Yeah.
About what we're actually chasing after and what truly matters. Are we, just going after these fleeting pleasures at the expense of deeper fulfillment?
Yeah. And I think it's about recognizing that true freedom isn't about indulging every whim. It's about making conscious choices that align with our values and our long-term well-being. Sometimes delaying gratification and embracing discomfort can lead to the most rewarding experiences.
Yeah, it's like choosing to go for a run, even though you'd rather just stay on the couch.
Yeah.
You might feel some discomfort during the run, but afterwards you feel so energized and proud of yourself. It's about, prioritizing long-term well-being over instant gratification.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this pursuit of balance, it's not a solo mission. We can learn from each other, share our experiences, support each other on our journeys. We create a culture that values well-being over excess.
Well, this deep dive into Dopamine Nation has been incredibly insightful. I feel like I have a new understanding of how my brain works and how to navigate the complexities of pleasure and pain in a healthier way. I'm sure our listeners feel the same. What are your final thoughts?
I'm so glad to hear that. It's a journey of continuous learning and adjustment. Remember, it's not about achieving perfect balance. It's about making progress, one step at a time. And as Dr. Lembke reminds us, the journey itself can be just as rewarding as the destination.
Well, thank you so much for guiding us through this deep dive into Dopamine Nation. It's been a really enlightening conversation.
It's been my pleasure. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking that balance in your own Dopamine Nation.